learned about some extraordinary people in this domain. Today we're going to learn about how we can remember these people. You have listened to the stories of 7 extraordinary or amazing people who dedicated their lives to making sure that all Americans have equal rights. These great Americans were able to bring about changes that resulted in new, fairer laws. They were able to do this because the United States, since its creation, has had a democratic form of government. That means one that includes the rights of all the people to vote for their leaders. This means that the citizens of the United States are involved in the political process. People can vote for political leaders who represent their interests and needs. It took a while for every American adult to gain the right to vote, but it did eventually happen. Now each person has an equal say in deciding what kind of government they want. In order to vote in the United States, a person must be 18 years old and a citizen. That means that he or she must have been born in the United States, have parents who are American citizens, or who have been granted citizenship. People who are granted citizenship are called naturalized citizens. Naturalized citizens are people who were born in another country but have chosen to become citizens of the United States. Every 2 years and every 4 years, important elections are held. People go to places called polls to vote. As you have learned, the right to vote is called suffrage. Voters can decide who should lead their state and who should lead the nation. They can help decide if taxes or money should be raised by the government to pay for important things communities need, such as hospitals, schools, and libraries, and whether taxes should be reduced so that people have a little more money to spend. These are important choices that affect all Americans. Suffrage is the way of making sure that the government is following the wishes of the people that it serves. Today, we take for granted that adult American citizens have the right to vote. We hardly think about it at all. But if you've heard about the journey that people long ago went on to make this a reality, you have heard about the obstacles or things in the way of people's paths. Now let's look at the lives and review some of the brave people we have learned about. What is Susan B. Anthony famous for? She worked hard to expand women's rights in America, especially the right to vote. A woman must not depend upon the protection of a man, but must be taught to protect herself, she once said. Susan was a famous leader of the women's rights movement. Sadly, Susan did not live to see the passage of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution in 1920, which made it legal for women to vote. But without Susan's efforts, the battle for women's rights might have gone on for much longer. Eleanor Roosevelt worked to improve the civil rights and human rights of many groups of people in the United States. During the Great Depression, Eleanor worked tirelessly to help those most in need. Eleanor believed that all people should be treated fairly, equally, and with respect. Later in life, Eleanor worked for the United Nations. She took her message of freedom and equality all over the world. Mary McLeod Bethune worked to create educational opportunities for African Americans, especially girls, during a time of segregation, the practice of keeping groups of people apart based on their skin color. Mary opened a school that eventually became a 4-year college, and she helped many African American men gain the skills they needed to be able to vote. Mary worked closely with Eleanor Roosevelt and a talented team of African American advisors to improve opportunities for all Americans. It is said that Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. He became the first African American to play Major League Baseball. When Branch Rickey, the president of the Brooklyn Dodgers, invited Jackie to play for his team, they both knew they were attempting to change people's attitudes and end discrimination in American sports. In 1947, when Jackie played in his first Major League game at Ebbets Field, he proved that he was not only an incredible baseball player, but also a man who had great courage. Jackie made the world a better place. At the end of Jackie's first season with the Brooklyn Dodgers, he was chosen to be the Rookie of the Year, and baseball was finally integrated so that people of any race could play together. On that cold December night in 1955, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, the world changed. Rosa's actions led to the Montgomery bus boycott. The power of so many people coming together to end unfair laws ultimately led to the end of legal segregation in the South. Today, many people feel that the civil rights movement really began in that moment when Rosa said no. That is why Rosa is called the mother of the civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the peaceful leader of the civil rights movement. He led the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. Martin promoted change and achievement of equal rights through nonviolence. Martin's powerful speeches changed people's hearts and minds. He led the way to change laws that were 100 years old, allowing African Americans to fully participate in the American society. As a nation, we honor Martin's work each year on the third Monday in the month of January. Cesar Chavez was once a migrant worker. Members of his family were migrant workers too. During those years, Cesar became very aware of how hard life could be for people without any rights or protections. Migrant workers worked long hours for little pay. They often lived in overcrowded camps. Migrant workers could rarely afford health care. Cesar vowed to change all of this. He dedicated his life to making sure that all farm workers, including migrant workers, had basic rights. Cesar brought people together and created a labor union called the National Farm Workers Association. Eventually, through his efforts, Cesar succeeded in getting better pay and working conditions for all migrant workers. Without his determination and determined leadership, these things might never have happened. Today, there are many people who work to make sure everyone in the United States is treated fairly and that their rights are respected. Just one example, it is important that people who have disabilities and who are challenged physically or mentally are treated fairly and equally too. People with disabilities might have trouble seeing or hearing or walking. They might need to use wheelchairs, walkers, hearing aids, or even service dogs. They may have special devices to help them talk on a telephone, or may have a service dog to guide them along sidewalks and around and into buildings. On July 26, 1990, President George H.W. Bush signed a new law called the American with Disabilities Act. This law gives protection to people with disabilities. For one thing, this law states that all people should be allowed easier access to all the places people enjoy going to, such as restaurants, movie theaters, libraries, and other buildings and public places. The law also states that public transportation, such as buses and trains, must have paths and entries that are easy to manage, such as ramps, lifts, or elevators. This law also offers to help those people who have diseases that are not curable and diseases that make it hard for people to take care of themselves. And so, as you can see, it is important that we stand up and recognize when people are being treated unfairly. We have just one world that we all share together. No person, because of the color of their skin, no cultural group or religious group, should ever be treated unfairly. We have a responsibility to treat all human beings with dignity or a sense of respect and honor. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter.